I'm going to give you pointers on how to deal with rats in the mists. I'm also going to give you some ideas in case you yourself are thinking about going in the mists to rat. In every single competitive game that I've played, there have been people playing the game a certain way that others consider and call ratting. In MOBAs, it is avoiding fights and trying to win by split pushing. In games like Apex Legends, it is avoiding skill-based fights and trying to win by surviving as much as possible. In games like Escape from Tarkov or Hunt Showdown, it is avoiding fights and sitting in one place for a very long time in hopes of getting a free kill and a free victory. And in Albion Online, ratting refers to, you guessed it, avoiding fair fights and taking advantage of opportunities where your opponent is already low either from mobs or is already in another fight with somebody else that you can third party and take advantage of. If you play in the mists, then it's quite likely that you already have a pretty strong opinion about ratting. The most obvious negative side of ratting is that it really feels like shit to be ratted. However, I want to point out 3 pretty big positives that ratting has in my mind. Number 1, it allows for more creative freedom and variety of different playstyles in the mists. This in turn makes mists more inclusive in general. And because of this, more people actually come into the mists. It might be players that only want to play the game with a certain build, loadout or playstyle. It might be players that don't yet have the skill to take proper 1v1 fights, but are using ratting as a way to ease into PvP and will become more regular fighting players later on. I personally, despite all the times I've been ratted, frustrated and sometimes just flat out closed the game because of it, overall I'm very happy that players have the opportunity to come into the mists and play it in whichever way they want, even if they are not very experienced at PvP yet. The second big benefit of ratting is that it helps fuel the incredibly advanced and interesting economy side of Albion Online. Without making this an economics video, you can just imagine that if high-level content was only available to 2 or 3 different builds, then the whole crafting, refining, transporting, gathering part of the game would become much more boring and one-sided. You would essentially have the option to either try to compete by crafting those 3 or 4 different weapons, or you would just grind your way through the others without any meaningful profit. So whenever an off-meta build succeeds in any sort of way in Albion, it is a good positive influence on the game as a whole. And finally, positive number 3, which I think is worth mentioning, is that ratting in a way balances the ecosystem. Because a lot of these fearless, low investment, low commitment players help keep the high IP gankers in check in the mists. If the mists was purely an arena for 1v1s, then running 8.3 or 8.4 would be incredibly profitable, and that would make the mists less interesting for the majority of us regular normal PvP players. Okay, I'm sure you have a lot of your own opinions on the benefits or the negatives of ratting that I did not mention here. In fact, I'd be very happy to hear about those in the comments, but for now, let's move on. Let's assume that whether ratting is good or bad, it's here to stay in the mists. So our next step will be to find ways to deal with ratting and find ways to think about it so that it can help us have fun and progress in Albion Online. Number 1, and I will say this many more times, mists are not a 1v1 arena. This has been very difficult for me to accept and still sometimes is, but unfortunately or fortunately, mists are not a 1v1 arena. The most important skill that I've learned after being killed by rats hundreds of times, and when I say I've learned, well, I still actually make that mistake sometimes, but the most important skill is that sometimes you need to disengage from a fight that you have won or are winning. Let this seep into your bones. Winning in the mists is not winning a 1v1. Sometimes You need to disengage from a fight that you have deservedly won. In this clip, I beat a carving player who was higher IP than me, and I felt like I've done so well, I deserve to get this kill. Even though it sucks to realize this, but sometimes outplaying your opponent in a 1v1 is not enough to win at the Mists. You need to develop the skill of surveying your surroundings and adapting to them. Sometimes you need to manage your resources not just for the 1v1 fight in front of you, but also think, what are you going to do if the rat dismounts? And this brings us to the second big point of how you can deal with ratting, which is to account for it already when selecting your loadout. If you are choosing between different gear pieces when going into the Mists, then lean towards choosing the ones that allow for a little bit more kiting. And these are any sorts of mobility tools or, very notably, invisibility. In this clip, I win a fight against a higher IP player, which is why it is so painful and difficult for me to not go for the kill, and in fact, while going for it, I end up dismounting this rat. Refer back to my previous point to avoid this mistake. Remember, sometimes you need to disengage even after winning a 1v1. Anyway, here I make this mistake, and now the player who dismounted as a rat could choose to kill me or the other guy, and the other guy's set is worth more than mine, but he has an undead cape. So the carving that ratted this fight just chose to kill me because it was an easy target that he could see on his screen while the other guy was running away in his undead cape. This is why undead cape is so popular in the Mists, and if you're going to the Mists with tier 8 or higher, it is often a good idea to have it as an additional tool to not only finish off your 1v1 opponent, but also to deal with rats. A much cheaper tool which achieves somewhat similar results is going to be the Assassin Jacket, which gives you an additional tool not only in your 1v1 fights, but also specifically when you're being ratted or find yourself in situations with more people around the fight, so you can go invis, calculate your next move and sometimes disengage, or have the rat focus on your opponent instead of you. Any sort of additional mobility options that you can figure out for your build will help you not only in choosing the kind of fight that you want, but also to deal with rats. This is why if you are playing a build which is good at 1v1, so maybe dual swords for example, but don't have the greatest mobility or kiting tools, then be prepared for being frustrated every now and then in the Mists, because if you remember, Mists are not a 1v1 arena and you will be punished because your build focuses on being good at 1v1s but does not handle new challengers quite as well. Now in the previous example I had the choice to either go for the kill or pretty much disengage because it was a fairly close fight. However, if you are winning a fight by a little bit more, then one thing you can do is just try to keep the fight going while kind of observing what the rat is going to do. In this clip here, I would like to use my E, but I don't because I don't want to dismount the rat. But then, as I'm following my enemy, the rat actually turns away from the fight a little bit, maybe afraid of being hit by mobs, I don't know, which gives me this nice opportunity to finish off my opponent without opening myself up to the ratting. Here a rat dismounts right in the middle of my fight where me and the opponent are both very low, and simply the fact that I take 2 steps towards the rat discourages him, so he mounts back up and I'm free to continue the fight. Note that if they chose to stay dismounted here, then even though they have a 15-second timer on their skills, I don't have enough HP, so I would have to just click all my mobility to disengage. So the next thing that you want to do is to always inspect everybody you see on your screen. I mentioned this in my Mists survival video, and this applies also when you are in a fight. You should get into a habit of inspecting everybody you see on your screen, even when you are fighting. Evaluate how well you could do in a fight against that person, and very importantly, evaluate their specific mobility. In this clip here, I quickly inspect the rat who dismounted in the middle of the fight and decide that I will probably be able to get away from them. And so I burn one of my mobility options in order to finish off the player I'm fighting and then keep boots to run away. However, in this instance, my estimations were wrong and I end up being caught by this player. But luckily another rat dismounts and in a way messes up the skill for the original rat. And this brings us to the next tool you have, which is using rats to your advantage. This is something you can do when you are the one losing the fight. If you are being ganked by a high IP player and you don't think you can get away, then first of all, watch my surviving mists video. But secondly, one of the tools you have if there's a player hovering around is to try and dismount that player in hopes that either they will just simply discourage the high RP player to keep following you because they will be afraid of the rat and potential 1v2, or maybe this player actually will dismount and start fighting the high IP player because they will see an opportunity to get a nice payday. Last little idea to help you deal with rats is to remember that if the player that you were fighting dies, you're instantly not in combat anymore. This means that unless you have already done damage to the rat, you are free to quickly use your soup, since you're not in combat, to heal up very fast and then potentially be ready to fight the rat or at least survive them. Oh, and if you are next to an exit, then you can also just leave, since your original opponent is dead, you are not in combat anymore. Quick summary of what we just covered. Number 1. Accept the reality that mists are not a 1v1 arena. Sometimes you need to disengage from a fight even if you are winning or have already won it. Number 2, use your build to prepare for the reality of the mists and to prepare for rats by favoring more mobility and, if you can, also a little bit of invisibility. Number 3, be aware of your surroundings and keep the fight going while observing the rat's behavior to maybe see an opportunity to win the fight without dismounting them, or maybe discourage the rat from ratting altogether so you can finish the original fight. Number 4, inspect everybody and evaluate whether you could potentially take them in a fight, and very importantly, evaluate what kind of mobility will they have. Number 5, be ready to use rats to your advantage if you are losing a fight. And number 6, don't forget that the moment your original fight ends, you are no longer in combat, so you can eat soup or exit the mists. Okay, the next section is for you when you are considering whether to go into the mists as a rat. And here I want to tell you a couple of things. First of all, I hope it is clear by now that regardless of what other people in the mists will tell you, regardless of what you hear about this online, in YouTube, Reddit, whatever, you are free to choose whatever playstyle and approach you want in the sandbox world that we call Albion Online. You personally do not owe it to anybody else to play the mists in any certain sort of way. However, the next thing that I think it's important to understand is that ratting has a deceptively positive marketing. What do I mean by these words? If you look at ratting in YouTube, or if you look at the kill board, or if you hear stories from your friends or guildmates, you build up a bit of an incorrect understanding of what ratting is like. The actual reality of going into the mists simply with the purpose to only rat is that you end up for about 80% of the time doing absolutely nothing. You are riding your horse from one place to the other, hoping that stars will align perfectly for you to be able to snatch that big payday. Most builds that are really good at ratting fights, despite being low cost and low IP, are very bad at doing PvE objectives or taking fair 1v1 fights. So you will be very limited while you are in the mists. Of course, you shouldn't just take my word for it. Go ahead and try out ratting if it seems interesting to you. I am just making sure that you understand that if you do spend 50 minutes doing absolutely nothing, then don't come to the conclusion that the Mists are boring or Albion Online is boring, but it is specifically the ratting only playstyle which accentuates the more boring parts of the open world sandbox PvP. Now the second point for you to consider before you become a full out rat is that there's three types of progression that you generally achieve in Albion Online. There is your silver, so how much money you have. There is your fame, how much XP your character has in different things. And there is your actual player skill, so how good and skilled you are with your character. Each one of these three makes progression in other areas easier, and it's completely up to you which one and how you want to prioritize. However, I just want to point out that ratting focuses pretty much solely on the silver or money progression for your account. And in my opinion, playing the game like that is by far much less satisfying type of progression than if you were to go into the Mists hoping to progress all three of these at the same time. By limiting yourself only to ratting opportunities, you take away your chance to use the Mists to progress your account in terms of fame, to fame farm a specific loadout or even just one or two specific items, and you take away your opportunity to progress your PvP skill, which is going to be very, very limited if you only take PvP situations as a rat. So what is my suggestion to you? My suggestion is very clear: to not go into the Mists solely for ratting. However, be constantly ready and on the lookout for opportunities that can arise as you do other things. In other words, choose a good fighting set which allows you to get into fair fights against other opponents in the Mists in order to progress your account in terms of PvP skill. A set which allows you to clear objectives in the Mists, not just when it's free, but also sometimes fight for camps, kill mobs, and so on and so forth, which allows you to progress your account in terms of fame, as well as get that good silver every now and then. I believe that this will give you the best Mists experience, but at the same time, while you're doing all that, you should still be open to seeing good ratting opportunities, and you should not feel bad about dismounting on top of a fight and trying to get one or two kills the easy way, so to say. At the end of the day, I hope that you can find and choose whatever playstyle is the most fun for you. And switch it up a little bit. Be the rat sometimes, kill rats some other times, try different builds and playstyles and of course different content, but make sure that you allow everybody else in the game the same kind of freedom. And never put somebody down just because their way of playing and winning is completely different from your approach to the game. Rats are an important part of the current ecosystem of the Mists, but so is killing rats in the Mists. So whichever side of the coin you find yourself on, have fun, enjoy your life, and don't forget to subscribe. Bye!